Hello, BookTube. Welcome back to Reading in the Dark. Byron here. This is going to be my most anticipated reads of 2019 video, and as it is the video about things I'm excited about, I am therefore excited. There may be moments in which some of the gang from Sesame Street just show up. It happens sometimes, and let's just not worry about it. I'm enjoying some really good peppermint hot chocolate in my favorite mug here that I showed you before, a little green tree mug thing. It's delicious, and it may or may not have some peppermint schnapps in it. It's keeping me warm on a cold winter night here in the frigid tundra of Florida. It is like 70 degrees. No, I'm kidding. I think it's like 50s or 60s. I don't know. It's too cold in my opinion because there's a reason that I live in Florida, and that reason has nothing to do with being cold at night. In any case, let's move on to all of the books because there are a lot of them. I feel like there's like 22 books on my list. That's my dog. So, all right, I'm just gonna try to just like pet my dog secretly while I talk to you. I'm gonna try and kind of get through this as efficiently as I possibly can. And the reason the list is so long is that I have like 73 books in my digital TBR, and I have at least 20 physical books on my shelf that are in a physical TBR as well. I've broken it into genre, kind of, starting off with my favorite category, and that is sci-fi / fantasy. The first book that I am very much anticipating reading in 2019 is a book that most people will laugh and judge and castigate me for having not read, Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. In other words, in 2019, I'm going to read the Harry Potter series, and I will join the human race, and I will be allowed into parties and functions once I have read these books, and I'm looking forward to being a fully fledged human, so that'll be great. And then I think I'll watch the movies, but I'm not going to read and watch. I'm going to read, and then watch. I just want to stay in the book world. Then, to the other side of the fantasy world, I'm going to be reading all of the, well, assuming I like them, the Song of Ice and Fire books by George R.R. Martin in the Game of Thrones universe. I'm going to read through all of those. I have the first book on its way from Abe Books, but it's been taking like 4 or 5 days for it to make its way from the cellar to the post office, which is a little bit suspect to me, so I'm a little concerned about that. Also, in case this mug starts changing color, it's green. And I have a green screen around me, which is ridiculous, but I do because I don't have bookshelves to film in front of, so that's what I do. Sometimes I can like work trickery to allow this to still be green, but sometimes it just seems like a huge effort. So sometimes this might be a green mug, and sometimes it might be like a gray mug, so don't be alarmed. Anyway, so I'm gonna read all of the George R.R. Martin books. The next book in the sci-fi fantasy category that I'm excited about is The Bone Clocks by David Mitchell. Now, the reason I'm excited about this is that I really enjoyed David Mitchell's writing of Slade House for my Spookathon. I just didn't love the ending of that story, but I also know that he's not exactly known for that. I think The Bone Clocks is considered one of his best books. Holly, a psychically sensitive child, once contacted by voices she knew only as the radio people, runs away from home. Now, as she wanders deeper into the English countryside, visions and coincidences reorder her reality until they assume the aura of a nightmare brought to life. So she meets all kinds of crazy people and has crazy, fantastical experiences as she's run away from home, and she's psychically aware. And I guess this book is like really trippy and like messes with people's brains, and I love books like that. So that combined with knowing how much I enjoyed his just writing, I'm really excited for The Bone Clocks, and I'll probably read it soon. And then there's just the Star Trek Discovery book series. So I read the first book in the Star Trek Discovery book series, which was called Desperate Hours by David Mack, and I was actually very pleasantly surprised by how much I enjoyed that book. It was kind of better than it needed to be, if that's not a rude thing to say, I don't know. The rest of these books are not by David Mack, but I own the second book, Drastic Measures by Dayton Ward, and then there's also a third book called Fear Itself by James Swallow, and then in 2019 they've already announced the fourth book called The Way to the Stars by Una McCormick. All of these books feature a different character from the show, and I'm sure they're all gonna be easy reads and just really fun, so I'm looking forward to that. And then I'm also really looking forward to a book that I also own, The Wind's 12 Quarters by Ursula K. Le Guin, because let's be honest, as soon as I read The Lathe of Heaven by Ursula K. Le Guin earlier this year, I learned right off the bat that Ursula K. Le Guin is amazing. I'm gonna basically read everything she's ever written as quickly as I possibly can, and so since I own this collection, which is an anthology of short stories, automatically excited for that. And then the final book in my sci-fi fantasy category that I am very much anticipating in 2019 is also a new release, so that I don't have it yet. And it is another sci-fi fantasy anthology, and it's called New Suns. It's edited by Nisi Shawl, and it is a collection of science fiction fantasy stories written only by authors of color. I've heard a lot about some of the authors in this book, and I'm excited to read this. I love sci-fi anthologies, so that is the sci-fi fantasy category, and just like rest assured, I'm going to read lots of other sci-fi fantasy books in 2019. Moving on to the literary fiction / historical fiction category. By the way, the term literary fiction is so dumb, you guys. As though none of this other stuff is literature. Only these books that aren't part of an obvious genre. Oh, this is literature. And, you know, it's all literature. And everybody has different values. But, you know, blah, whatever. Literary fiction and historical fiction. So there are 3 books in the historical fiction category that I'm really excited to read, but one of them in particular I'm super excited about. 2 of them are about the World War II and the Holocaust. The first one is called White Rose Black Forest by Eoin Dempsey. It takes place in 1943, and there's a woman who's a German dissenter named Franca in the Black Forest. It's all snowy. She lost her father and her brother. She is hopeless and she has no reason to live. And then she finds the body of a German airman laying in his parachute in the snow, and she nurses him back to health. He's wearing the uniform of a German Air Force person, but it turns out that maybe his identity is not what it at first seems. So that's sort of like, haha, possibly like a romance, I'm not sure, but it should be pretty great. The second book is The Ragged Edge of Night by Olivia Hawker. I've talked about this quite a bit. This is a book about a man named Anton who is stripped of his place in the world when his school is seized by the Nazis. He finds out about and then decides to join a group called the Red Orchestra, which is an underground plot to assassinate Hitler. The third book that is historical fiction that I'm super excited to read in 2019 is called The Weight of Ink by Rachel Kadish. This is a book that is centered around 2 women in history, one in the 1660s and one in the 20th century. Esther Velasquez was an immigrant from Amsterdam who was permitted to scribe for a blind rabbi just before the plague hits the city in the 1660s, and Helen Watt, an ailing historian with a love of Jewish history. So basically the story goes back and forth and centers around Helen Watt helping to look into and catalog this cache of ancient Jewish documents that were recently discovered in the home of a former student. So she's sort of like trying to unravel the secret of the identity of the document scribe, which of course is the woman from the 1660s portion of the novel. I love it when historical fiction jumps back and forth in time, and so I know I'm going to love this book. The next book that I would consider to be literary fiction, I guess, is called A Piece of the World by Christina Baker Kline. I have had my eye on this book for months, and then I sort of forgot about it, and then I saw it on the shelf, and it was like a bargain book, and I had to buy it. This is a book that basically tells the imagined backstory of a very famous American painting. A very famous American painting called Christina's World by Andrew Wyeth. To Christina Olson, the entire world was her family's remote farm in the small coastal town of Cushing, Maine. Born in the home her family had lived in for generations and increasingly incapacitated by illness, Christina seemed destined for a small life. Instead, for more than 20 years, she was host and inspiration for the artist Andrew Wyeth, and became the subject of one of the best-known American paintings of the 20th century. I read the first chapter of this as a sample on my Kindle before I bought the book, and I was immediately transported and fascinated, and I knew I had to read it, and I don't know why I didn't buy it back in the day, months ago, but I didn't. So I'm kind of glad I waited, because now I have it on hardcover, and it's just such a beautiful painting, which of course graces the cover of the book, and is gorgeous. So I'm super excited. It's just a great idea for a book. What a wonderful idea. I'm excited. And then the final book in this category that I'm excited to read is by the author of my one of my favorite books in 2018, which was The Flicker of Old Dreams, and that author's name is Suzanne Henderson, who recently commented on one of my videos because I mentioned her book, and she was so gracious and grateful for me saying nice words about her book and for reading it and for telling people about it, and that was like so cool. So this is called Up From the Blue by Suzanne Henderson. Up From the Blue is the novel that she released before the Flicker of Old Dreams. It was actually her debut novel. Tilly Harris's life is in disarray. Her husband is away on business. The boxes in her new home aren't unpacked, and the telephone isn't even connected yet. Though she's not due for another month, sudden labor pains force Tilly to reach out to her estranged father for help, a choice that means facing the painful memories she's been running from since she was a little girl. I don't need to know too much about this book to know that I'm going to love it because Suzanne Henderson's writing is just impeccable. Pick up both of these books if you enjoy beautiful prose because she's so amazing. Moving on to young adult, which is again kind of an arbitrary category. I don't know if there's like a law that says what books young adults can read and what books they can't. But, I read The Hunger Games for Booktubeathon, and I completely enjoyed it. I did not feel like I was reading a child's book. I didn't feel like I was reading a book that was written for someone else. I had a wonderful time reading the book. It was just great, and I was actually surprised how much I liked it. And so the first two books on my anticipated YA reads of 2019 are Catching Fire and Mockingjay by Suzanne Collins, which of course are books 2 and 3 in the Hunger Games trilogy, because again, I was just actually sort of pleasantly surprised by how much I loved the Hunger Games and loved the main character. The next book on my list of YA, and it's a pretty short list, is The 5 Stages of Andrew Brawley by Shaun David Hutchinson, which I recently hauled and mentioned in a book haul video. This is about a young man who loses his family in a car accident and recuperates and then ends up living in the hospital and then befriends another young man who was brought in with burns. It's been mentioned by a few booktubers that I follow, and it just seems really, really beautiful. And there's something really kind of fascinating about the look of the model on the cover. And it's just everything about it makes me want to read this book. So as of this moment, those are the only YA titles that I have on my list of anticipated reads in 2019, but I have very quickly learned that YA is not something to shy away from just because you're no longer Y. The next category is horror. The next category is horror and thrillers, and I kind of lump them together because there aren't that many of either. There's really just 2 books. So one of them is a horror book and one of them is a thriller book. How about that? The first book that I'm excited to read, that I'm going to definitely read because I have a copy of it in an anthology that I recently hauled, is Carmilla by Sheridan Le Fanu. This is the story that apparently inspired Bram Stoker's Dracula, which, as you know, is one of my favorite books of all time. It's a classic Victorian vampire novella. Is there anything else we need to know about that? No, there's not. Still good. Still very strong. And then I also am super excited for this thriller that has no title and no release date. It is the 13th book in Tess Gerritsen's Rizzoli and Isles book series. There's no announcement for this book. There's no release date for this book, but somebody on a message board somewhere wrote that they contacted Tess Gerritsen and confirmed from her that the 13th book will be coming out in 2019. So I'm just going to trust that that's true because it does seem like it's about time for another book to come out in the series. And so automatically I'll be pre-ordering that book and enjoying it. Tess Gerritsen is awesome. I've read every single one of her books actually. And I am probably going to reread this series this year, and because they're such page turners, I might be able to just read them all this year right before book 13 comes out. And I have to imagine it's going to be late in 2019 since it hasn't been announced yet. I have my thoughts about what I would like to have happen to these characters, but I'm sure those things will not happen. And then I have a couple of autobiographies on here. Actually, I've only read a couple of biographies in my life. I almost always read autobiographies, and I'm not sure why. It just seems a little bit more compelling, I guess. I suppose that could mean the details that go into these stories are a little bit more self-serving. I don't know. I also don't want to read a book and feel like maybe somebody's attacking somebody else, like an Andrew Morton biography. So anyway, I usually read autobiographies if it's a biography, and I have 2 that I'm really looking forward to. One is After All by Mary Tyler Moore, which I mentioned before. I was going to read it earlier, I think in November, and I didn't get to it, but I've had it for years. And the other one is something that I didn't know existed until I recently saw it on the shelf, and I think I'm going to buy the audiobook of this, and that is Parker Posey's autobiography called You're on an Airplane by Parker Posey. Which is just, okay, so Parker Posey is a comedic actress. I mean, she's an actress. She's a great actor. She's very, very funny, and she's mostly known for comedy, but, she's an actor. She's actually, so incredibly good on the Netflix reboot of Lost in Space, by the way. If you enjoy Parker Posey, and if you like sci-fi, like me, you will watch that show and say, is that Parker Posey? And then you will realize that, in fact, it is. And she gets such a great performance, and it's not exactly a comedic performance, it's just a good performance. She's just a good actor. And I have enjoyed her in many, many things over the years, especially You've Got Mail and all of the Christopher Guest movies. So Parker Posey is hilarious. Her autobiography is called You're on an Airplane, and the concept is you're sitting on an airplane next to Parker Posey, and she just proceeds to tell you her entire life story. To me, that's hilarious, and she recorded an audiobook. I listened to the preview of it, and it has all the sound effects of being on an airplane, and it literally just sounds like Parker Posey just won't shut up and is like, oh my God, this one time, and starts telling you about her life. So frankly, that's an automatic buy for me as well. And I kind of don't love audiobooks, but when it comes to autobiographies, She's an actor and a comedian, and she recorded the audiobook, so it's probably going to be like a cut above. I can't imagine a better way to spend my drive to and from work, but listening to Parker Posey talk about herself. Okay, then I have a couple of classics that I'm anticipating reading in 2019. God help me, I think I will get to them. And these are both gigantic. Well, one of them is more gigantic than the other. The first one is a book I have read before and really liked, and that's Crime and Punishment by Fyodor Dostoevsky. This is obviously the story of a young man who commits a murder, and it's sort of like his inner mental struggle and like sort of unraveling after the fact. And I'm going to read a new translation of this by Nicholas Pasternak Slater. After doing a little bit of research into a few different versions and a few different translations of this work, I decided I definitely did not want to read the Constance Garnett translation, which was the one that I read in high school. Even though I enjoyed it in high school. She was a contemporary of a lot of these authors, and she did the most commonly reproduced translations of like Crime and Punishment, Les Mis. I read a few different new translations of this, and I decided on the Slater translation. There are a couple of others that seem good. They're all different. Choosing a translation is like such a weird thing because none of them are the original. They're all going to have a little bit of creative license in choicings. Some creative choices will have made. Depending on who translated the book, there are going to be some creative choices that were made by them that have nothing to do with the intent of the original author, and that's just like unavoidable. It's a weird thing, but I can't read Russian, and therefore I have to choose one, and I chose Slater. This translation was published by the Oxford World Press. The next classic I want to read in 2019, and I don't know if this is going to happen, but I think it will, I hope it will, is Bleak House by Charles Dickens. I was talking with a friend of mine at work today about Dickens, and she hates reading Dickens, even A Christmas Carol. In A Christmas Carol, I actually think he's kind of funny. The fact that he restates things from like 17 different angles, to me, instead of being annoying, is actually sort of hilarious. I think he's kind of cheeky, as they say across the pond. I'm hoping that that is a part of his writing in these other more major works as well. I've read the first chapter, I guess it was called the chapter, of Bleak House, and I was not bored. There's something about the way he paints a picture, even though he goes on and on and on about it, that is just compelling to me. And Bleak House was made into a really cool looking adaptation by the BBC starring Gillian Anderson in, I think, 2005. And I decided many years ago that instead of just watching it, I would read it first. And of course, it's 13 years later and I still haven't. Hopefully I can read it and get through it because I know it's a long one, and then I can finally watch that miniseries. And that is the last book on my list of most anticipated reads of 2019. Harry Potter, Game of Thrones, The Bone Clocks, Star Trek Discovery, The Wind's 12 Quarters, New Suns Anthology, White Rose, Black Forest, Jagged Edge of Night, The Weight of Ink, A Piece of the World, Up from the Blue, Catching Fire, Mockingjay, The Five Stitches of Andrew Brawley, Carmilla, Rosolian Isles number 13, You're on an Airplane, After All by Mary Tyler Moore, Crime and Punishment, and Bleak House. And I'm going to get into more specific goals for 2019 in a different video, but I'm going to up my game in 2019 and read more than I did this year. So I'm going to read more than 52 books. So this should be less than half. I hope I can get to all of these. I think I probably will, especially since I'm excited about them. So this was my video. This is my most anticipated reads of 2019. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have any other suggestions for books that I might want to try reading in 2019, please leave them in the comments. So if you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button. And if you love this video and like to see more content like this in the future, hit the subscribe button. You can even hit that little bell icon so that you'll be notified when new videos are posted. And until next time, I will be here in the dark, drinking alcoholic chocolate beverages and reading. Bye, guys.